Hi, GenExcel students. This is Alejandra, the graduate assistant for GenExcel. I'm here with Dr. Elisa Hernandez from the psychology department here on campus, and today we're going to talk about imposter syndrome. Hi, Dr. Elisa. Would you like to say a few words?
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me. Like Alejandra said, I'm Dr. Elisa Hernandez. I'm actually a staff psychologist at the Counseling Center here on campus. I've spent my career working with college students, specializing in identity development and emotion management. And so I myself am a first-gen college student, and so I really identify with the first-gen college experience.
That is great to hear. So as a first generation student myself, I actually have dealt with imposter syndrome in the past and, still occasionally here and there. So I know for me, when I was accepted into the graduate program here at Cal State Long Beach, it was a huge deal for me to be like, hey, did I actually earn this? Is it maybe because I did my undergrad here that they, pushed me a little bit more? And so I just wanted to quickly, dive into what imposter syndrome really is.
So I want to start by doing a little bit of a self-assessment. And so let's think about the ways that we're impacted by imposter syndrome. So these are some questions to ask yourself. Do you believe if I can do it, anybody can? When you do succeed, do you secretly feel like you fooled them again? Or do you sometimes shy away from challenges because of nagging self-doubt? Do you tend to chalk up your accomplishments to being a fluke, no big deal, luck, or just because somebody likes you? Or like you said, just because you were a student here before and maybe the people in the program knew you? Do you hate making a mistake, being less than fully prepared, or not doing things perfectly? Do you live in fear of being found out, discovered, or unmasked? So if so, you're definitely not alone. 70% of people experience a moment of imposter syndrome at some point in their lifetime. And there's some research that suggests ethnic minority students and first-gen college students are more likely to experience imposter syndrome. So let's get into what it is. So what is imposter syndrome? Basically, it's the belief that you're not as capable or intelligent as others perceive you to be, and the fear that you're going to be found out at any moment. This belief is maintained by not being able to take credit of your accomplishments and by not internalizing your successes. So one kind of imposter syndrome belief might be, I only got into college because the admissions staff made a mistake. There are other comments might be something like, I only got an A because it was easy. The teacher felt sorry for me, so they graded me more easily. Or I got that internship because I was lucky or because I knew somebody. I want to be clear that there's a difference between being humble and recognizing privilege and opportunity and completely discounting your own effort and your skill and anything that you did that contributed to that positive outcome.
Right.
Imposter syndrome gets reinforced by how you respond to tasks that are presented in front of you. So whether it's a paper or a job opportunity or some kind of leadership position. So it's both how you're responding to the task at hand and how you make sense of the positive feedback that you're receiving. On the one hand, you might respond to tasks by procrastinating in an effort to avoid the anxiety that comes with, I don't know if I can do this. Or you might over-prepare in an effort to kind of complete this perfect product. And so over-preparing means you put a lot more work into something than is necessary because you're striving for that perfection. Then when you get feedback, you immediately start looking for the external reasons why you succeeded at something. So maybe it was easy, or maybe the professor was in a good mood, or maybe you even tell yourself, well, I only did well because I worked really hard. And if I were really capable, if I were really intelligent, I shouldn't have to work that hard. So then it just becomes this process of like the next time something falls on my plate or I have to do something, I have to work 10 times harder to make sure that I don't get caught that time. And so this cycle just keeps perpetuating itself over and over again. Imposter syndrome doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so there are a lot of different things that contribute to it. Perfectionism is a big component of this. So if perfection is the marker of success, you're never going to get there. Perfection is impossible for anybody. And even if you do something well, there are always telltale signs that it wasn't quite perfect. And so you're always going to be able to kind of tear yourself down and tear yourself apart because it's an impossible standard. And like I said, perfectionism is the thing that leads to both over preparation and procrastination. And it fuels that idea that failure on a task is the same thing as failure as a person, or that the only way that you can be worthy is if you succeed or kind of live up to this perfect ideal. Another piece of it is discounting praise and denying your abilities and talents. So what happens when you don't internalize your past successes is that you depend on external factors that are out of your control. You don't build up your self-confidence, and you don't believe that you can replicate your results, because you're constantly kind of trying to maintain this positive impression management without feeling any kind of control over the results. I want to highlight here that there's a difference between being realistic about your academic struggle points and your past educational experiences and imposter syndrome. Because with imposter syndrome, you're getting positive results. So you're getting the external feedback that you're doing well, but you're just not able to internalize that credit. Whereas if it was a true struggle point, you might not be getting that positive feedback, which is a sign that you might need to work on something and kind of build up a skill, which is kind of another issue. But the idea with imposter syndrome is you're getting good feedback, you're just not able to believe it. So and then what does all of this lead to? So what is the end result of imposter syndrome? You end up feeling anxious, depressed, you have a lot of self-doubt, you feel emotionally exhausted, you underperform on things, you're not really challenging yourself because you're scared of what that might mean. And so all in all, it's just kind of crappy, a crappy feeling to end up with, always being on edge, always feeling like it's not enough, no matter what kind of evidence is coming out on the other side. And I know we got some really good questions from students, so I want to try and transition into that. So Alejandra, do you have some questions for us?
Yes. Yeah. So like Dr. Hernandez said, we did get some good feedback from students. And one of the questions was, does imposter syndrome come up more frequently among people who generally struggle with self-worth? Is imposter syndrome a sign of clinical depression?
Right. So that can sometimes be like a chicken or an egg question. And it can be really hard to pinpoint what's coming first. I will say that an important component of imposter syndrome is believing that external success and achievement is a determining factor in self-worth. So the only way that I know I'm worthy is if I'm getting these like grades or rewards or praise from other people. And so if my self-worth is not coming from me, you can be more susceptible to imposter syndrome because it's always coming from outside. It also has to do with how you're defining what it means to be successful and how success is achieved. So we all have these ideas in our head about how things are supposed to be, how things are supposed to go, and reality and life rarely kind of match up with that.
Right.
For example, so if I only consider myself a worthwhile person if I get straight A's, or I get into graduate school, or I win awards, but I also believe that those achievements should be effortless, I'm going to make myself like a prime candidate for imposter syndrome because those things don't match up. And over time, that's going to erode my self-confidence, my sense of self-worth, and it might lead to a depressive episode. On the other hand, being in a depressed state means having a negative view of yourself, a negative view of the world, and a negative view of the future. And that can really color how you're perceiving your success and can interfere with being able to internalize success, which is also kind of a component of imposter syndrome. And so that's basically a long-winded way of saying that imposter syndrome on its own is not necessarily a sign of clinical depression, but they can kind of go hand in hand.
Okay. So another great question that we have is imposter syndrome something that people from historically marginalized groups suffer from?
Yes, and there are a few systemic factors for why that's the case. One is related to family messages. And so any family messages that say intelligence and success do not require effort and do not include experiences of failure are going to be the kinds of beliefs that set you up for this perfectionistic thinking. The belief that intelligence or success follows a path of perfection where roadblocks or setbacks are not included starts to lay that foundation to internalize perfectionism and internalize a sense of fear of failure. Another way that family upbringing contributes to this, especially for first-gen students, is if your academic achievements or talents are perceived as being very different from that of your family. That imposter syndrome can be a way to stay connected to family because you don't want to start thinking of yourself as very different. And it's a fear, you want to avoid the fear of possibly being rejected by them because of different experiences and different life trajectories. So if it feels like a point of disconnect from your family, it can sometimes be psychologically easier to say, well, I don't really deserve this. I don't belong here. I belong with my family. And that is kind of mixed up in a lot of things, because it's not to say that those family members aren't intelligent or aren't capable. It's just they may not have had the same opportunities. And so really trying to untangle what that fear of rejection is connected to. There can also be some guilt and shame about why you are the success. And it can be easier to discredit your abilities and your accomplishments instead of facing the discomfort of why you have this opportunity. And a lot of times that discomfort is connected to systemic injustice. And so these are some ways that if we're not paying attention to why this is happening and what the roots of it are, it can be really easy to just kind of like cocoon ourselves in self-doubt and believing that we're the problem, when really the problem is more a systemic cultural kind of like a problem in the world that you have to decide for yourself whether you want to connect to that or not. These are hypotheses that researchers and clinicians have developed, and you're the only one that can look into your experience and say, oh yeah, that definitely fits for me, or like that doesn't really, like, I don't connect with that at all. And so again, these are just kind of ideas that people have come up with. And so it's your job to figure out if it clicks. Another reason why imposter syndrome is more likely to come up for underrepresented students is connected to this idea of stereotype threat. So being made aware of a devalued identity and underperforming on tasks based on the negative stereotypes of that identity is what stereotype threat is. And I encourage anybody who wants to look more into that to kind of just Google it or find an article about it. We're not going to spend too much time on it. But one example might be like women are still underrepresented in STEM courses. And because of that, if you are a woman in those settings, it's going to bring up feelings of being an imposter. And if the expectation is that you're not supposed to perform well because of your gender identity, and then you do end up performing well, that kind of dissonance, that disconnect can really mess with you and and you can either make sense of it as, well, this is because of the systemic societal factors, or this is because of me. And when you start to kind of believe like, this is something that's wrong with me, that's when the imposter syndrome can kind of creep up. Yeah, so when the stereotypes of your identities are negative in whatever field you're in, and you're one of the only ones there representing that identity, then it can really lead to devaluing your abilities and attributing it to luck. A similar phenomenon can occur with first-gen students and students of color. If they're not expected to be in a university setting and there's no college-educated or professional models in their family, the default is to doubt whether you belong and whether you're an imposter, instead of really questioning, why am I underrepresented? Why are my identities underrepresented in this arena in academia? And so it goes from an internal question of why me to why not me, and that idea of trying to make sense of the world in context. I really like this quote from an article that Edwards wrote in 2019, and it's basically her own attempt to make sense of her experiences as somebody who really wants to be a scholar, is a scholar, and cannot connect to that identity because of her past experiences and her own kind of identities as a Black woman, as a low-income student, as a first-gen college student. That article is actually really good if anybody wants to look that up for continued reading.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think you made some really great points that our students would love to hear more about. So another great question and common question that we got from students was, what can we do to alleviate imposter syndrome? Like, what are some overall tips to get over the sense of being an imposter?
Yeah, so this is a lot of information going to be coming at you right now, but take what you can, feel out what works for you, and then kind of go from there. So let's get into it. As always, awareness is the first step to overcoming a problem. So being aware that, oh, this is something that exists in the world. It's a concept that exists for many people, and it's not just me experiencing it, is something that can really help you start to untangle those ideas. Part of that is talking about it, is like having some conversations about it with your peers, with mentors, with trusted positive influences. Many people, 70% of people experience this kind of phenomenon at some point in their lives. And so being able to talk about it and being able to kind of share in that experience with somebody will help relieve some of the loneliness that's connected to it. The second one is separate your feelings from reality. And so this one is really important because feeling something is not the same as fact. And I would encourage you all to start looking at your emotions as sources of information versus reflections of reality. And you can honor your emotional experience and respond accordingly, but also separate feeling from fact. I can feel insecure when I get a B on a test and think that I failed, but the reality is that I received a passing above average grade. And so the feeling of insecurity is giving me information that I'm putting a lot of weight on the grade to tell me my worth. And that's something that I can start to work on and start to unpack. The other thing is being aware of context. So like I mentioned earlier with stereotype threat, think about when you're in settings that might activate that feeling of insecurity, the feeling of anxiety, because your identities are underrepresented. It is a normal response to feel like an imposter, to feel like you don't belong when you don't see anybody like that looks or comes from a place like you do reflected in your environment. So it's like, is imposter syndrome, what is the word? Is it an abnormal feeling to feel? Not if you're the only one in the room. And so really trying to bring context into the way that you're thinking about things. Connect the feelings to the environment versus your own perceived abilities. Next is focus on the positive. So focus on what you can do well and lean into that. And if you have trouble identifying what you do well in an academic setting, that might be a sign that something deeper is going on and might be a sign that you might need to start counseling to look into that and see, like, why is it so hard to figure out one or two things that I might be good at in an academic setting? The next one, make peace with failures and mistakes. So this kind of leads into, we got to start breaking that perfectionistic ideal. And we have to start recognizing that failure and mistakes are just a part of life and a part of learning. If you knew everything you were supposed, or if you knew everything about the topic that you're learning about, then you wouldn't be a student. You would be an expert. And presumably all of you who are here getting your undergraduate or your graduate degrees are students. And even professionals in their field do continuous learning over and over and over again. We have as psychologists, we have a state mandate to do a certain amount of hours of learning every license renewal cycle. So we are expected to continually be learning because we're not expected to know everything all the time. And things change. And so really being able to make sense with the fact that as a learner, you're going to be making mistakes and you're going to have experiences of failure because that's part of the learning process. Visualize success. So in this one, trying to replace those predictions of failure with predictions of success. So when you catch yourself anticipating how difficult something is going to be, or that someone's going to expose you, or that you won't live up to a task, invest in visualizing the positive opposite. So invest in visualizing that you will do well on this, that you will organize your time and kind of that you know something about it and you'll learn more about it and be able to express it, that you will succeed in tasks versus always just putting energy and effort into thinking about how you're going to fail at something. Celebrate your success. And so remember how I said that this is one part of the imposter cycle that is one of those reinforcers, is how you react to positive feedback. This is the most important tip. Change the way you respond to achievement and success by celebrating it instead of discounting it. And this has to become a new habit because it's not going to change overnight. It's not going to be easy the first time, and it's not really going to do anything if you just do it once. But if you do it over and over and over again, consistent celebration and recognition of your skills is going to help you feel more secure and more self-confident in your achievements. The last one that's on this page is, don't wait until you're 100% ready to do things, because then you're never going to do them because you'll never feel 100%. Or you're reinforcing that perfectionistic idea of, I need to over prepare and overwork and be like completely prepared and informed in order to do something, which is really going to hinder the opportunities that you have in front of you. So this next set of tips is really just centered around, how do you talk to yourself and how do you make sense of the world? This is an area where talking with a therapist can be really helpful. We have to be really clear about our values and how we're defining things like student, leader, failure, professional, intelligent, scholar. If we don't clarify these concepts for ourselves, the noise of the outside world will define it for us. And then we end up really lost, because we're trying to like rely on these outside definitions of things that don't really click with us, or that don't really make sense for the lives that we want to live. Work on identifying the messages you're telling yourself about who you are, about what you're skilled at, what your future holds, and where you belong. And begin to notice where these messages might be too rigid, where they might be distorted, or where they might be connected to somebody else's beliefs. Some beliefs that you might want to look at a little bit more closely include, I will only be accepted if I'm a high achiever or if I'm a success. My self-worth is dependent on how I perform or on what others think about me. Mistakes are a sign of deficiency. And intelligent or successful people don't work hard. So those are all really distorted beliefs that can cause a lot of distress, because they're not really rooted in reality, or they're rooted in this kind of like all or nothing thinking that doesn't allow for a lot of wiggle room that is life.
Those are some great tips. So we do have one final question that was submitted, and I think it's important to highlight. So it's written as follows. I don't go above and beyond on campus. It's sports, Greek life, clubs, etc. So I feel like I do not belong. I feel that the people who are involved actually belong, but I do not have time to be more involved. So how do I deal with that? How do I accept that I am too busy to involve myself into other organizations at school? Also, I'm a first-gen Latina, so I have no one to ask. No one in my family has ever attended a four-year institution, so I cannot relate to anyone close to me. I feel powerless, like I do not belong. Because why would destiny choose me to change history of the family? I don't feel adequate to take my family out of the recurring college dropout cycle.
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you for being so open and asking this question. I'm sure you're not alone in feeling this way. I would encourage anybody who feels this way to really contact the counseling center and kind of like come and kind of work through some of those ideas, some of those beliefs. But we are right now providing telehealth services. And so I do encourage you to reach out to the counseling center. We're available and we're here to help students. I want to try to answer this as best I can, kind of given the limits of it being a static question. But first is, unfortunately, there's no easy answer to this. And so there's a lot of different components in it that I want to break down. The first is, this person mentions not being involved. And so here's where I would encourage you to really take time to define, what does it mean to be involved in campus? What does it mean to be an involved student? The kind of examples they gave were student organizations and things that require, honestly, like a commitment and kind of a recurring, consistent commitment of time and energy. But what if being involved could mean something else? What if it could mean having a relationship with one or two professors on campus? That relationship that's developed by going to office hours, by participating in class, or even kind of having email exchanges. What if it could mean participating in kind of one-off events on campus, like, movie screenings, or like an art show or a lecture, even on Zoom? These things are happening right now. And so being able to participate in things that really are the marker of student life can be one way of feeling involved. And so again, if we can define what it means to this person to be involved, then we can try to come up with some more creative solutions that don't require the traditional, oh, I'm a leader in a student organization or I'm involved in sports. Because that is a reality. We have to deal with our own realities. And so we have to work with what our limits are, but also try and be a little bit creative in how we're trying to meet those other needs that we have. The second is I want to challenge a little bit on the second point of not having anyone to ask. First of all, you're asking me. So that's a really good first place to start. And if you're following the First GenExcel Instagram, then presumably you're a member of that program, which means that you have peer support, a mentor, you have the GenExcel staff. And so those are all people that you can ask these questions to, that you can kind of get feedback from. And so that first step of really being able to recognize what are the resources that you have access to, and then acting on them, just like you did with this question. So you could have just read the imposter syndrome kind of post and moved on with your life, but you decided to take action and ask this question to maybe get some helpful responses about it. That's a really powerful way of getting your needs met. And I want you to kind of acknowledge that the story that you're telling yourself of being alone in this might not be the most accurate story. There could be a lot of truth to it, but it could also be like moments or holes in that story where you are able to get support from other people. For the last part of your question, that one's not so clear cut. Trust me, I understand the pressures of being a first gen student. And what comes up for me is when you say, like, why me? Why is fate, the world, the universe, whoever choosing me to change the dynamics in my family? And I would ask, why not you? Why not you? Perhaps all of the things that have happened in your family have led up to you having this opportunity. And so it's not just like, it's not a flash in the pan. All of our histories have a lot to do with how we're in the positions that we're in. And so first I might ask how you're reacting to the question of why not you? And that's going to give us some clues about what's going on. So is it comparisons with other people, like, oh, but my cousin has these kind of things and is really good at this, so maybe they should have gotten that opportunity? Is it negative self-perception, like not really feeling good about yourself, and so not feeling like you bring a lot to the table? Is it internalized depression? So like, you know, the world tells us that Latinas, Latinos, Latinx people are not supposed to be educated, or not supposed to have high powered jobs, or not supposed to be in these worlds. And so maybe you've internalized that and said, well, like, I'm not supposed to be here, so why even try? Maybe it's more systemic, other systemic reasons that feel like it's separating you from really acknowledging and holding on to that identity of a student. And so like, I don't know how you're going to answer those questions. I don't know what your responses are going to be, but I would encourage you to start talking about this with people, to come, or not come, but call and make an appointment at the counseling center, to have an appointment with a therapist who can really help work through this stuff with you. Talk to your mentors, talk to your peers, and really get a sense of like, how can I start addressing and answering these questions for myself?
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing such great insight and such great knowledge about imposter syndrome, and, you know, tips to try to overcome feeling inadequate in certain situations. And we would just like to say, if you have maybe other resources that students can check out, if they want to get, you know, further guidance. You did mention signing up for counseling and making an appointment. If you wanted to quickly go over that.
Yeah, so CAPS is open right now. We're not physically open, but our counselors are available. We've transitioned over to telehealth, and so we have telehealth appointments that are available both for brief individual counseling, for couples counseling, crisis intervention. We have on-call counselors who are always available during during business hours, but even after hours and on the weekends, you can call the front desk and you can get connected to somebody who can help you work through whatever crisis is happening. We provide referral services for long-term therapy in the community. There's limited medication consultation because there's a psychiatrist that we have that works part-time for us and part-time for student health. There's a ton of outreach programs and workshops. If you're not already, I would encourage you to follow, I don't have them written down, but it's the Beach Buddies. So it's a new peer mentoring program Let's see what I have here. Yeah, so peer program Beach Buddy, CSULB Beach Buddy, I think is on Instagram, and then Project Ocean. So both of these are peer programs. One is more focused on educational, like psychoeducation and workshops and kind of just informing the community about things that are happening. And the other one is more focused on peer counseling. And so this might be a great way to kind of start working through some of those imposter syndrome feelings, to be able to talk to somebody who has some training in being able to engage in those conversations. Both of them have Instagram accounts that are really, really helpful. They have a ton of programming going on. This might be one way to feel like you're involved, is to show up to some of these. They have a variety of hours and times and days that they're doing it. So just being able to check out like what's going on campus, what are my resources, what do I have access to, and connect in that way. There's also a few more structured support groups that happen weekly, but they're drop-in. So you don't have to make a huge commitment to it. One for students here might be Rainbow Cafe for LGBTQ students. There's Latinas at the Beach for Latina identified students. There's Sister Friends for Black identified students, Butterfly Healing Circles for undocumented students. And so there's a ton of different resources that we have. Some of them are drop-in groups, some of them are like peer counseling. We have this new virtual drop-in consultation called Let's Talk. And so that's for students who like want to talk about something, want to get more information about what's going on or what they're dealing with. They can drop into these virtual Let's Talk services. And so definitely encourage you to come or to check out the website, to call and ask about what is available for you. And we have ongoing group counseling that starts every semester. And so if you're interested in joining a group counseling that's more structured and provides more ongoing support, that's something that you can do at the beginning of every semester.
Thank you so much. Those were, again, great resources, and I'm sure our students would really benefit from knowing more about these. We just wanted to say thank you again for taking the time to work with us, and we hope to have more series like this in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.